Virtually everyone in the country has a digital identity. We vote, we sign all of our documents digitally. Importantly, and I'll explain why later, we basically save 2% of GDP a year because of digitization. And what is important also for those of you who are in industry and government is that we have basically 0.3% of the population works in the IT sector, and that 0.3% of the population produces 7% of GDP. In all kinds of measures, we do rather well. We are number one in cybersecurity in Europe, but also this number has changed. It's back to number one. We're number one in the world in internet freedom, which shows that you can, in fact, have very good cybersecurity and enjoy complete freedom on the internet. My talk is going to be basically with the following points, and if you remember nothing else, this is what you should remember. Digitization has almost nothing to do with technology. The cost of technology has decreased so dramatically. This is expressed by Moore's law that says every year and a half the cost of computing is halved, that today digitization is not about buying things. It's all about how you set up the legal system and what you enable people to do in your society when you use digital technology. Basically, what you need for a digital society, the most important thing is you need a strong identity. It must be secure, and it needs to have legal efficacy, by which I mean you can sign legal documents. There's a sociological part to this as well. You need to develop digital services that people want, not just your Ministry of Finance bureaucrats. Third, you need a secure architecture, and I'll explain what that means. And finally, what will become for every society a bigger and bigger problem is data integrity. And that's an issue which I will talk about at some length. The way we set up our system, we use existing standards. We use open source, non-proprietary software. From the very beginning, we have always had a very strong private sector involvement. What we did and what we have today, we actually set up in 2001. That's 18 years ago. It is still one of the most, if not the most modern system in the world, and all new services rely on this. A brief note of why we did this. My country was occupied by the Soviet Union and the Nazis for 50 years. We were an independent country. And when we were an independent country, our neighbors to the north, the Finns, who speak a language fairly similar to ours, and Estonia, we had the same GDP per capita in 1938, which was the last full year of where you could measure GDP per capita. When we became independent again, we saw that Finland had a GDP of 22,000, and ours was 2,800 US dollars per capita. That shows you the wonders of communism. But in any case, we were very poor, and we knew all along that we would be like the Finns if we had been free and independent. And so we had this task of what do we do? One thing that we knew that the Finns had was this. They had Nokia. And this was the first real popular mobile phone. In my country, at the same time, we had this. And not only did we have this, but only 1/3 of the population had this even, and the rest had nothing. So it was clear that technology was something we had to get involved with. So we had all these people saying, well, what are we going to do? And there were various different ideas. And then, with all these various theories, I was living in Washington at the time. I was the first ambassador to the US after independence. And then this came out. This was Mosaic. It was the first web browser. It came out in 1993. Before that, even though the HTTP protocol had been invented in 1989, but there was no web browser. You had to go buy this thing. But I looked at this and I said, there's one thing about this that makes it stand out, which is that everyone is starting on a level playing field. No one is any better than anyone else. So I proposed to the government that, well, we should make the country digital. They kind of laughed at me, but I had one other experience, which was that 50 years ago now, when I was 15 years old, I was lucky enough to have a one-off education in programming. And I had a teacher who was doing her PhD in mathematics education, and she organized for a small group of students learning how to program. And while we learned fairly primitive programming using a language called BASIC, it meant that from then on, I never felt fearful of computers, fearful of technology, or fearful of things like programming. It was not magic. Later on, when I was in university, I used to make money programming. And so when I came up with this idea that we should put all schools in my country online and with computers. And so government, fortunately at that time, was very progressive, and they said, well, okay, we'll support this idea. And so by 1998, 97, 98, all schools in Estonia were online. This was such a successful program that the banks said, wow, this is a good idea. We should put everyone online. And so the banks, together with the government, decided that they would put computers throughout the country, in all of the municipal town halls, town centers. So we came up with a second program, which was to teach older people, mainly living in the rural areas, also how to use a computer. So we were moving along and doing fairly well and thought, okay, this is the way we would go. But then we realized one thing, that in the digital world, there is a big problem. And this is the problem. This is the fundamental problem of digitization. And it is a problem that even the most developed place in the world for technology where I live today, which is in Silicon Valley, they have not taken steps to really solve this issue. And that is the problem of identity, which is in this cartoon, which is, if you don't know English, it's two dogs, and one says to the other dog, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. This actually accounts for 80% roughly of hacking, which is someone stealing your identity or using a spear phishing attack to get your credentials. And this is really one problem that must be solved if you want to digitize a country. And it's a problem that the biggest, richest countries in the world, Japan, the United States, Germany, have not had the political will to solve, unfortunately. So what you need, first of all, fundamentally, is a digital identity. And a digital identity requires certain things. It must be secure and unique. That means that no one has the same identity as you. You need to make it equivalent to a legal signature. So you can sign contracts or anything that you ever sign, all of the documents that you sign, your tax returns, whatever it is that you sign, you need to make that possible digitally. In order to make it secure, you need two-factor authentication, which I'll explain in a minute, and you need end-to-end encryption, which means that from the place where you start doing anything in the digital world to where it ends, it must be encrypted all the way. And for those of you who are in politics and in policy, the hard lesson is that you have to make this digital identity mandatory. Because if it's not mandatory, you'll see that 10 to 20% of the population will take up a digital identity, an ID card or whatever form of digital identity you have. The problem is, if you make it optional or voluntary, only a small, as I said, I say you get 15% of the population taking up the digital identity. If you're a company or if you're the government, you'll say, why bother doing it? Why invest in this if only 15 or 20% of the population even has this identity? And that is a key factor when I talk about the political will that you need in order to accomplish digitization. That's where most governments fall down. They won't do it because they think it's politically risky. If they don't do it, then they don't digitize, basically. So what we did was we passed, in the year 2000, a digital signature law that makes a digital signature equivalent to a physical signature. All legal transactions in my country, except for 3, you can do digitally, and you can do it because we have a digital signature law. And it gives us what is the most powerful and most robust digital governance system that exists in the world today. There are some catching up. Singapore is pretty good too, but generally no. The 3 things we cannot do online in Estonia, where you must show up in person to sign something by hand, and that is when you get married. To have that legal, you have to show up, both sides. The other thing where you both have to show up is when you get divorced. That's a little more difficult than, sometimes you might want to wish you could do these things digitally, but anyway, you cannot. And the third issue is in transferring physical property. If you sell your apartment, or if you buy an apartment, you must show up. And there's a pretty good reason for that, especially these days, if you look at all of the problems in London, in New York, in Miami, where you have anonymous shell companies buying properties in Trump Tower, for example. You don't know who owns this because it's through a bunch of shell companies. In my country, that's not possible. So in 2001, we rolled out this digital identity. That's what it looks like, no big deal. Very quickly realized that, well, if you have a chip, what else has a chip? It's your SIM card in your phone. So why don't we enable you to do these things with a SIM card? Well, we did that. End-to-end encryption, just to explain how it works. It just means, this shows that from where you start, be it your computer, your laptop, your phone, from that point, everything that goes out is encrypted. And wherever it goes, it must be encrypted. And that is a sine qua non. Two-factor authentication. These days, fortunately, you can actually get something like YubiKey from Google. But two-factor authentication is vital, the minimal thing for secure transactions. You have to have something such as a chip or a YubiKey, which is just a chip or called a token, and something you know. In our case, it is a series of numbers, but it can be something else. You have to put these together in order to ensure that your identity is you and no one is faking being you. Since you already have the chip either in your card or in your phone, there's no problem with that. And then, of course, you remember what it is that you have to match with the chip, and that from there on in, it will be secure. So this is what a digital signature looks like in my country. You just get online, and you get online and you identify yourself, and then when the system says you are you, then you can sign the document. The next issue that you need to solve is the architecture. The architecture of your system will be absolutely vital to having a secure system for all of your services. Think of it this way. When you have a digitized government, you will have property records, you'll have court records, you will have your health records, all of these things, and there are hundreds of them. All of these are somewhere out there, and you want to access what you want. You want to see your health records. Okay, well, then you have to get to those health records in a way that is completely secure. What is also important is that the government needs to see these records, and how do they do it, and what can they look at and what they can't look at. For example, you would not want anyone other than the people you have authorized to look at your health records. On the other hand, the police might want to look at your traffic record to see if you're speeding, whether you're at fault or not. The way we did this is to build what is called a distributed data exchange layer, which means that everybody keeps their data in their servers wherever they are, but they have to be connected some way, and they are connected through a center that authenticates your identity. And there is no central database. In my country, we got to this point because at that time we were very poor, and we didn't have enough money to build a big central database. But fortunately, and this is called serendipity, you don't have the money to do what you want, but then you find out that the solution you have is far, far more secure. And so the whole point is that everything you want to access, you must always verify or authenticate your identity. The way to think about the security aspect is just like a ship. There was this huge accident in Alaska about 20 years ago. The world's largest tanker, oil tanker, ran aground, and it was the biggest oil spill in history. Well, the reason it was the biggest oil spill in history because all the oil was in one big hold. So when it ran around, all the oil ran out. Nowadays, people got smart, and when you have oil tankers, they have them in compartments. Well, this is the same way our system works. That is, the data are not in a central database. They are all connected. Each access must always be through authenticating yourself. And now, this is where we turn on the short video that explains how this works. So if you could show that video, please. Hello? They said they were ready to go. There it is.
Running a modern state is a data-centered endeavor. Ensuring the functioning of the state requires administering very large quantities of data. Estonia lacks a centralized or master database.
There's no video.
Data is stored where it is created. Each agency administers its own data separately.
There's
and
no
data
video.
is not duplicated. At the same time, state authorities and agencies need data outside their purviews in...
Stop. There's no video. I mean, you have the sound, but you don't have the picture. I was told this was all checked out, but okay. Anyway, well, this explains how the system works and how the different compartments are set up and why it is that this is important. I hope we get this video going. Actually, you have the video in the background somewhere. See, I can see it. But there's a big white spot in the middle. All right, well, if it doesn't get fixed in 30 seconds, I'll bag that part. But see, you can see that it's going on in the back, but if your IT person can figure out why it is that there's a big white square there. If not, I will go on. No luck? All right. Next, bag that. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Ensuring the functioning of the state.
Why don't you turn the first one off, and then I can show you the video. Please turn the first one off.
Administering very large quantities administering very large quantities of data is a data center ensuring the functioning of the data requires administering.
Nope. All right, back that. Let's go to the next one. Okay, when you have the distributed data exchange layer that we have, it allows a complete change in the bureaucracy that has never existed throughout the entire history of bureaucracy. The most fundamental thing to understand is that bureaucracy, ever since the first bureaucracies were created, say in China or in Egypt or in Mesopotamia, has always been a serial process. That is, you go to an office, you have a piece of paper, you sign it or something, and then it goes to the next office, then it goes to the next office, goes to a third office, and then eventually you get back the permission. Now, that's limited strictly by the technology of paper, because you can't do things in parallel. Whereas once you get into the digital world, you can actually run all the bureaucracy in parallel. The difference is, say you want to start a business. In my country, you want to start a business, you do it online. And you do it in, say, some other country, you do it on paper. You have to do all the same things. Now, say you want to start a business, you say, okay, you have to show who you are, then you have to prove your business. Every member of your board member has paid their taxes, they've paid their alimony, they've paid their speeding tickets, all these things have to be done. And so in Italy, for example, 2 years ago, it still took 1.5 years to set up a company. In my country, it takes 15 minutes. That's because everything is done simultaneously. Corruption is the next thing that you can get rid of once you go digital. There are two kinds of corruption. There's the kind of corruption which is the high-level corruption, which is where you pay some person high up to do something that's illegal. There's the other kind of corruption that actually is far more pervasive and is something that too many countries have to deal with, which is where in order to get a service, you have to pay an official to do something that is legal. He's supposed to do it, but he won't do it unless you pay him off. Now, I know in your neighboring country, in Greece, they call this speed-up cash. If you want to get something done, you have to give them a little money and it'll get done. Thing is, if you digitize these services, because most of the things that a bureaucrat is supposed to do that's legal are things that he actually doesn't have much to say about. He just has to check that you're qualified. But who can check if you're qualified better than a computer? Because you just check it all off. Yes, you're this old, you have this many kids, therefore you get this break on your taxes or whatever. This is why my country has by far we have the lowest corruption of any country that's ever been under communism, but we're in the upper half of the EU in terms of low corruption, because we've eliminated so much of the corruption by going digital. So if you want to deal with corruption, you should digitize your services. Finally, the thing that you get out of this combination of identity and architecture is what we call a once-only rule, which we have instituted as a regulation in my country. We are trying to get this through the EU, but the EU is kind of slow because they have serial processing and not parallel. But that means that the government may never ask you for any information it already has. I mean, in my earlier life and in my current life in the United States, I'm constantly filling out my address, my telephone number, my various ID numbers. You don't do that in my country because, I mean, why bother? If you identify yourself digitally, everything that you need is already there. The final point I want to talk about that you really need to set up a digital society is data integrity. There are huge arguments about privacy that go on throughout the European Union, the United States, Japan, all over the place. Privacy is someone knows something about you. They see a copy of your data. See, privacy is if someone knows finds out and publishes my blood type. I may not be very happy about that. That's violating my privacy. Or someone publishes my bank account. I'm not very happy about that either. Data integrity is when someone changes your data. If someone changes your blood type or the record of your blood type, it can be fatal to you. If someone changes your bank account, most likely it won't be to make you richer. And so one of the things that we've done in my country is to put all key data onto a distributed ledger, which is more commonly known as blockchain. Ever since 2007, all key data in Estonia has been on blockchain, which gets to be very, you realize when you have a digital society, you have things, for example, court records. When you have a paper society, it's very hard to change the results of a court case. When everything is digital, all of our court cases are digitized. Imagine someone goes there and changes the outcome of a court case. How do you prove that it's been changed? You can't if you don't have paper. So, but if you do put it on blockchain, then you can accomplish the same effect as having it on paper, and it won't be changed. Now I'll just run through some things that we've done. We can vote online highly securely, more securely, I would argue, than most countries. This is how we used to have our prescriptions. This is how we do our prescriptions these days. I'll go back to show you this slide. This system that we have has now been adopted by 15 countries. Most importantly, Finland, because now our systems are integrating. We have digital, as I mentioned, we have digital prescriptions, but we've gone one step further, which is that if you're a Finn who comes to Estonia or an Estonian who goes to Finland, if you lose your medicine or you get sick, you can get your doctor back at home to write out a prescription for you, and you can go, say if you're a Finn in Estonia, you can go and buy that medicine that your doctor in Finland has written a prescription for. You can do it in Estonia. Ultimately, this is something I think should work across all borders. That's in fact one of my hopes for the future, is that in fact you can make digital prescriptions available all over, so that if you're traveling and you get sick, you have your doctor at home, he can give you a prescription, you can go to whatever pharmacy you're in. That is not technically difficult. It is, however, very difficult in terms of regulation. You can go a step further, which is medical records. So the idea would be, if I am visiting Istanbul and I get sick here, I will go to the doctor here, identify myself to him so that he can look at my medical records from my home country. Clearly, no Turkish doctor will be able to read Estonian, but he would receive those medical records already translated into Turkish. That is a technological no-brainer. You can do it today. The problem is, again, the legal basis of it, the will to create that legal basis, and that is where we are always stuck. One last thing I'll leave you with on what you need to do if you're going to digitize society. And Turkey, I think, is kind of maybe big enough not to need this, but I'm not sure. But this is a picture of the Fukushima tsunami result, which also led to that, which was the meltdown of the nuclear reactor. Now, we in Estonia don't live in a seismically active area. We do, however, have a different problem. And in the past 1,000 years, we have been invaded twice a century, which is not too great. Last century was really bad because you were invaded 6 times. If you go digital, your big worry is what happens to your data. So what do? We decided we'd set up data embassies. We have one right now. It's located in Luxembourg, where we have key information, all of these things, the voting registries, the citizen registry, tax registries, business directory, property records, are all stored also in a server in Luxembourg. But what we did with this, you can think of this in terms of Julian Assange. Appealing to the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Immunity and Extraterritoriality, we declared a server an embassy. I mean, you have to get the agreement of the other country that you're doing this, and Luxembourg agreed. So all of these databases are constantly on a dedicated line, in real time, 24/7, updated. So if anything bad happens to my country, all of our crucial data still exists somewhere else. As I said, if Turkey doesn't get invaded, but you do have earthquakes, you might want to think about this as well in order to store your data. So if you put this all together, this has been, at least for my country, a huge leap from being a backward, poor country that had been abused and occupied by the Soviet Union for half a century into being a country that is still the most digitized country in terms of government services in the world. It's not hard to do. All you need is the political will to do it. So please do it. And thank you very much.
Mr. ILVES, thank you for your participation. Thank you for being with us today. It's an honor to have you here. By the way, there was a technical issue. Would you like to replay the video because we solved the problem?
Sure.
Okay, let's watch it then. Tekrar seyredebilir miyiz videoyu? Tekrar videoyu seyredelim. Would you like to tell something about that?
Yeah, as I explained, the architectural system that we have is based, so it's a distributed system so that everything is in its own database and how we connect all of them, and that gives us this huge security. Here's the video, if maybe not.
Hopefully. I think we're going to watch it this time.
There it is.
Running a modern state is a data-centered endeavor. Ensuring the functioning of the state requires administering very large quantities of data. Estonia lacks a centralized or master database. Data is stored where it is created. Each agency administers its own data separately, and data is not duplicated. At the same time, state authorities and agencies need data outside their purviews in order to function. For example, the police constantly require information from the population register. Likewise, the unemployment insurance fund depends on information from the health information system. How can authorities securely exchange important data? First, the data must be easily accessible by the authorities that are authorized to use it. Second, the integrity of the data must be maintained. No third party should be able to make any changes to the data while it is in transit. Third, the data must remain confidential during its journey. It must be protected from the eyes of unauthorized parties. The X-Road is a data exchange platform that fulfills all three of these requirements. The X-Road makes life simpler for both the state and the citizens. For example, when a child is born, information about the birth is sent directly from the hospital to the population register. From there, it is sent automatically to the health insurance fund so that the child will have health insurance and a family physician. This prevents the creation of excessive paperwork and saves time. The state functions in the background. The X-Road helps authorities make work processes more convenient. Many activities can be automated, which frees employees to deal with matters that require human involvement. Authorities also don't have to worry about the authenticity of data. They can be confident that data received from the tax board definitely originated from the actual tax board. Additionally, the X-Road can be used regardless of what technology an authority uses. For the state, the X-Road, above all, makes it possible for authorities to efficiently exchange data among themselves. Sensitive information moves securely, and the system itself is so resilient that it cannot be easily brought down by those with malicious intentions. Since the birth of X-Road in 2001, the system has operated continuously without interruption. The X-Road helps the state see the big picture of how different authorities are connected to one another. In addition, the X-Road makes it possible to exchange data not only within the country, but also across national borders. That is, of course, if databases and information systems are working properly. The biggest beneficiaries of the X-Road are, of course, the citizens. They enjoy the benefits of a better functioning state and save all of the time they would otherwise spend submitting papers and forms. How much time? During the time it took you to watch this animation, the X-Road saved around 240 working hours in Estonia. Cool.
And I will end here, but I will say that the 240 hours that we saved on a 3.5-minute video is how the government saves 2% of GDP a year. That's what you have to commit to NATO every year. So if you want to make NATO cheap, do this, because you get 2% savings. Thank you very much.